Hello and welcome to GreenBiz Studio. I'm Grant Harrison, Director for Sustainable Finance and ESG with GreenBiz Group, and I'm excited to be speaking today with Jaymin Desai, Director of Strategy at OneTrust. Jaymin, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Likewise, appreciate you having me, Grant.
Awesome. Well, you're just about at the 1-year mark of serving as Strategy Director with OneTrust, which helps companies to define, track, and of course, importantly, realize environmental and sustainability goals. At a high level, what are some of the most consistent trends you've been seeing in your work with companies during this past year as the sustainability agenda climbs up the regulatory agenda?
Yeah, the number one trend that we've started seeing is organizations are now heavily focusing on the actual data collection for the respective metrics to report on. Some organizations will get started by utilizing SASB or GRIs, like the basic metrics to start reporting on before they get into their own custom metrics. And they've started realizing that the actual data capture itself can be a pretty big hurdle, at least from the very first time around, compared to doing it over and over, year over year. But most organizations have now started focusing on understanding where that data sits, what the overall macro trends are in the context of what their stakeholders are expecting for them to report on. And based off of the data collection, translating that into the overall disclosure reports. And they're almost using this as means of practices before they might have to submit actual disclosures, whether it's to the SEC or to the EU as a whole, based off the EU taxonomy that's coming about. But that's where we've started seeing the trend over the course of the past year of actioning by understanding what the status quo is by collecting all their data sets on those metrics.
Well, you and I talked last week or 2 weeks ago about one of those actual disclosures. We spoke on a GreenBiz webcast about the future of SEC regulation, and we're talking here in October of 2022, the future of SEC regulation and how to prepare. Can you tell us a little bit here about how OneTrust's ESG and Sustainability Cloud can help companies to meet this pretty unprecedented regulatory moment?
Yeah, so like most regulations, there are lots of nuances and still certain components that are up in the air in terms of what their expectations are for you to submit on that overall 10K form. But with that being said, at least there's a baseline to get started with. Now, within the regulation, they indicated TCFD is the possible standard or framework they may use. A lot of these times when it comes to different standards and frameworks, they're essentially all talking about the same metric. But maybe they've nuanced it in terms of their terminology a little bit different compared to that of another standard or framework, but it gives you a baseline. So essentially what our platform allows organizations to do is centralize the intake of all of those metrics that they're capturing the data sets on. That way, one, they can always have a evergreen understanding of exactly where their organization is from the context of reporting. And through that centralization of the data intake, the ability to translate that to whichever disclosure it is. So regardless of whether it's the metrics that the SEC expects, if you're doing CSRD reporting in the context of the EU taxonomy, et cetera, regardless of where those metrics came in from or what they're labeled as, you can easily translate it to the disclosures, whether for regulatory purposes or stakeholders that you want to easily provide those outputs to kind of create that level of transparency and build trust.
I want to follow up on that previous question and reference the first question I asked here on the importance of realizing environmental and sustainability goals. How does OneTrust's ESG and Sustainability Cloud uniquely support not just the capacity to measure and track, but to also act?
Yeah, absolutely. And this goes back to the original question of the kind of trends that we are seeing within kind of our customer base, but a lot of the organizations that I talk to on a day-to-day basis, which is, look, before we get into the actual actions of what we can do, we as an organization need to understand where we are. And that's really the starting point. It's, again, that context of not letting perfect get in the way of good. But by understanding your status quo and where you are as an organization, that gives you better data to then understand and set realistic targets for you as an organization. Now, in the context of sustainability, if you're looking at your carbon footprint goals, the ability to use science-based targets to set those goals. And if you set those goals based off of you kind of doing this activity on an ongoing basis rather than every 2 years, you have the ability to understand how are you trending across those targets. And in addition to that, what are the initiatives that you and the organization need to take? Who's responsible for actioning this and almost treating that as a workflow of initiatives that you are progressing towards to be able to hit your targets? and have those projections to understand when you need to pivot and almost make it like you do your financial strategies within the organization. If you're looking quarter over quarter in terms of performance, pivots you need to make in the market based off performance, et cetera, think of the exact same when it comes to both your carbon footprint or other metrics in the context of ESG that your organization's focused on, has set targets about, and most importantly, your stakeholders care about at the end of the day.
And of course, the companies that you're referencing that you talk to, they're on this sustainability journey, some more at the beginning, some farther along. Plenty of statistics out there about X percentage of companies in the S&P 500 or Russell 3000 or whoever are starting this journey or have produced this many sustainability reports, which is fantastic. That's not to say that all have begun this journey. So what do you have to tell in terms of guidance or advice to those who are either looking to start this journey now or just at the very early stages?
Yeah, if you're at the very early stages, you're just starting, it may seem overwhelming from the get-go. And that's because, simply put, it is overwhelming. There's lots of different nuances. There's lots of data that you need to capture to report on. But that doesn't mean that you have to be able to do it all starting from day one or even year one when it comes to your initial disclosure. It's almost like, and I know we used this comparison last time too, but it's almost like filing taxes. The very first time you file taxes, you're looking for like 10B, is it fit into this box? Where is this located? Actually, where is my actual W-4 form or 10 form that came in from work? I have no idea. Yeah. And then the next year you do it, you probably filed it, or nowadays it's all digital, so you can just upload it and it will automatically pull all the data sets in. It's a very similar exercise. The very first time that you do it, it may seem overwhelming. You're trying to figure it out yourself in terms of where the data lives, how it needs to be reported on. And it's just a matter of practice. So do it the very first time. Again, limit the scope of your first disclosure to the specific metrics that you may want to focus on that your stakeholders care about. If you're not sure, utilize SASB, GRI. Those standards are out there that are well adopted, and SASB even breaks it down to your specific industry. So at least it's a good starting point. And then you can continue to grow and mature your program year over year over year. And you'll get that feedback directly from your stakeholders as you continue to report on these disclosures. Because I know we've talked about it in the context of regulatory implications, but at the end of the day, it always falls back onto those stakeholders, whether they're consumers, employees, or businesses, in terms of what they expect.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jaymin. I'm looking forward to learning more from and keeping an eye on OneTrust's support for companies making their way in this space. It is certainly a dynamic and important one. And you have just heard from Jaymin Desai, Director of Strategy at OneTrust in the GreenBiz studio. Thank you, Jaymin, for being with us.
Thanks as well, Grant. Appreciate it.